The dust on the road to Larkspur Hollow was the color of old rust, and it clung to Mercy Whitfield's boots the way regret clings to memory. She knelt at the edge of a chokecherry thicket, pulling the sour black fruit from its branches with fingers gone raw at the tips. It was late August. The Colorado sky stretched wide and merciless overhead, bleached almost white by a sun that gave heat without kindness. She had been 3 days without a proper meal, and the chokecherries puckered her mouth and did nothing to fill the hollow ache beneath her ribs. But they were what she had, and so she ate them. She was 23 years old. She had been a wife for 11 months and a widow for 6 weeks, and in the space between those 2 words, her whole life had been rearranged without her consent. Her husband, Daniel, had been thrown from a green-broke gelding he'd had no business riding, and the horse had come home without him, and that had been that. The little claim they'd been proving up near Bitter Creek went to his brother by law and custom, and Mercy had been left with a trunk of dresses, a Bible with her mother's handwriting in the flyleaf, and nothing else that could be called her own. She had walked out of Larkspur Hollow that morning with the trunk left behind at the boarding house, too heavy to carry, and only a carpet bag over her shoulder. She did not know where she was walking to. She only knew she could not stay where every face reminded her of what she'd lost. The sound reached her before the man did the low creak of wagon wheels and the patient clop of a mule's hooves on hard-packed clay. She did not look up right away. Pride was a foolish thing to still be carrying when a person had nothing else, but Mercy carried hers like a second skin. She was not a beggar. She was a woman resting by the road, eating what the road provided. The wagon stopped. She felt him looking at her before she lifted her eyes to confirm it, a long, unhurried study. The kind a man gives a fence post he's deciding whether needs mending. When she finally raised her face to his, she found a man, perhaps 35, sun-cured and lean, with a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in 3 or 4 days, and eyes the pale gray of river ice. He wore no hat, which she would later learn was because he'd lost it to a windstorm 2 counties back, and hadn't yet found reason to replace it. He looked at the chokecherries, staining her fingers. He looked at the carpet bag. He looked, longest of all, at her face, and something in his own face did not soften exactly, but settled, the way a man's expression settles when he has found the answer to a question he'd been turning over. "Those'll sour your stomach before they fill it," he said. His voice was unhurried, flat as the plains around them, not unkind. "I'm aware," Mercy said. She did not stand. She would not scramble up like a chastened child. He studied her a moment longer. "I've got 11 men coming for the harvest, and a cook who quit on me Tuesday to go marry a man in Pueblo." He said this as though reciting the weather. "Can you feed 11 men 3 times a day and not poison them doing it?" The question landed strangely in the hot afternoon air. Mercy had braced herself, without quite realizing it, for pity, or for something worse than pity, the kind of offer a lone woman on a road learns to fear. This was neither. This was a transaction, plain as a nail driven straight. "I fed 40 men a day in my father's boarding house from the time I was 12, she said. 11 will not trouble me." He nodded once, as if that settled a ledger in his mind. "Board and $6 a month, paid at the harvest's end. Name's Judah Cole." He did not offer his hand. He simply turned the wagon and waited for her to climb up beside him, which she did, setting the carpet bag between her feet, and neither of them spoke again until the ranch buildings rose up out of the shimmering distance, like something built by men who had forgotten why they'd started. The house told her everything about the life he'd been living before she stepped into it. A bachelor's house, functional and forgotten, dust thick on every surface that wasn't touched daily. A kitchen that had clearly been surrendered to expedience rather than care-burned pans. A nearly empty flour barrel. Coffee grounds crusted in a pot that had not been properly scoured in what looked like a season or more. Judah stood in the doorway and watched her take it in, the way a man watches for a verdict he half expects to be bad. "It's gotten away from me," he said, which Mercy privately considered the understatement of the decade. "Where's your well?" she asked. "Out back. And lye soap?" He pointed to a hard yellow bar on the windowsill. "I'll want more than that." Rags, a good stiff brush, and whatever coal oil you've got for the stove flue." She was already rolling her sleeves past her elbows. He did not question the order of her requests, did not apologize for the state of things, only nodded and went to fetch what she'd asked for. And Mercy understood in that small exchange that this was a man who recognized competence when it stood in front of him and had the sense to get out of its way. By the time the sun dropped low and gold over the western ridge, the kitchen had been scoured to its bones, and Mercy had found, in the wreck of the pantry, enough salt, pork, and dried beans, and one sprouting onion to make a pot of soup thick enough to call supper. She ate her portion sitting at the one clean corner of the table, and it was the first food in 3 days that did not taste like penance. When Judah came in from the barn, he stopped in the doorway the way a man stops when he walks into the wrong house by mistake. The room smelled of onion and wood smoke instead of neglect. He said nothing about it. He sat, and she served him, and he ate every spoonful and wiped the bowl with a heel of bread, and when he was done, he carried his own dish to the basin and washed it himself before she could reach for it, a small thing, but she marked it, because a man's manners in an empty kitchen tell you more truth than his manners in a crowded room. The days that followed fell into a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. The harvest crew arrived 11 sunburned, rough-mannered men who eyed the new cook with the wary hope of men who have eaten too much of their own poor cooking. Mercy fed them beef and dumplings the first night, and cornbread thick with bacon drippings the second. And by the third night, the arguments that had been simmering among the tired men had quieted into the low, contented murmur of full stomachs. A well-fed crew works harder and quarrels less. Her own father had taught her that truth before she was old enough to understand why it mattered. Judah watched all of it, with the patient attention of a man cataloging something he did not yet have words for. He noticed the way she moved through the kitchen like she'd been born knowing its geography. He noticed the way the ranch hands began scraping their boots before coming inside, out of some new respect for her clean floors. He noticed, most of all, the way the house itself seemed to wake up, the way sunlight through the windows seemed to land differently on a floor that had been swept, on a table that had been oiled and rubbed until it shone. He began doing small things without being asked. He fixed the sagging step on the back porch that caught her hem every morning. He oiled the hinge on the pantry door that shrieked every time it opened. One evening he left a basket of wild plums by the kitchen door with no note at all, and the next evening there was a plum cobbler waiting on the warming shelf when he came in from the fields, its crust burnished gold, and he ate it in near silence. And something in his face, when he thought she wasn't looking, was closer to wonder than to hunger. Their words to each other stayed spare, and practical talk of supplies needed, weather coming, how many men would need feeding on a given day, but beneath the spare words something else was building, slow and patient as bread rising under a cloth. They were two people who had each been alone a long time, recognizing in each other a kind of competence the world rarely bothered to notice, let alone honor. One night, Judah came in long after the crew had eaten and gone to the bunkhouse, having stayed out to doctor a mare with a torn fetlock. He found Mercy still awake at the kitchen table, mending a shirt by lamplight, a plate covered against the cold waiting for him on the stove. "You didn't need to wait up," he said, easing into the chair across from her, his voice rough with the day's exhaustion. "A man ought to come home to something warm," she said, not lifting her eyes from her stitching. He watched her hands work the needle in and out of the fabric, steady and sure. And something settled in his chest that he did not yet have a name for, not gratitude exactly, though there was gratitude in it, but something closer to the feeling of a fence post finally driven true after years of leaning. He had buried a wife 4 winters back, taken by a fever that had swept through 3 counties that spring, and in the years since he had told himself he was managing well enough. He saw now, watching this quiet, capable woman mend his shirt by lamplight, that he had only been enduring. There was a difference, and it had taken her arrival to teach it to him. The trouble arrived on a September morning with the particular smell of dust and money about it. A buggy too polished for the rutted ranch road pulled up before the house, and a man in a city-cut coat and a bowler hat stepped down with the brisk self-importance of someone who has never once doubted his own welcome. "Judah Cole?" the man said, though his tone made clear he already knew the answer. Aldous Prine, First Territorial Bank of Pueblo. Judah's face went carefully still. The way a man's face goes still when he's bracing for a blow he can't yet see the shape of. He led Prine inside, to the same table where the hands took their meals. And Mercy, peeling potatoes at the counter, felt the air in the room change temperature. Prine spread his papers with the confidence of a man laying out a winning hand of cards. It's the note on your breeding stock, Cole. Due at month's end. I'll be frank with you, the beef market's soft this season, and word from the Denver yards is it'll soften further before the first snow. The bank's grown uneasy holding paper on a ranch this exposed. I'm aware of the market, Judah said, his voice flat. Of course you are, Prine said, in a tone that suggested the opposite. But there's no shame in a man knowing his limits. Cattle and ledgers are different arts, Cole, and few men are skilled in both. The bank's prepared to buy back your note today at a discount, naturally, and take the land as security. Saves everyone the unpleasantness of default. It was theft wearing a banker's collar, and every man in that kitchen doorway who had drifted in to listen knew it. Judah's jaw tightened. He had counted on the fall sale of cattle to cover the note in full, and Prine's smug certainty said he knew that plan was now standing on soft ground. Before Judah could answer, Mercy set down her paring knife and walked to the small desk where the ranch ledgers sat gathering dust. She did not ask permission. Prine's eyebrows rose in something between offense and amusement. "This is bank business, miss," he said, "not a matter for the kitchen." Mercy ignored him entirely. She opened the cattle ledger and ran her finger down the columns with the same unhurried precision she brought to a recipe. "You tallied 390 head for the main drive," she said, her voice cutting clean through the room's tension. "That's right," Judah said slowly, watching her now with the beginning of something like understanding dawning on his weathered face. "But you held back the 14 calves from the North Meadow. The ones too small in the spring branding." She looked up, first at Judah, then leveled her gaze directly on the banker. "They weren't worth driving with the herd in April. But for 2 months now, they've had every scrap of whey from this kitchen, every bit of spoiled milk and garden trimmings, out at that pen by the spring house. I've been feeding them myself. They are not small anymore." A silence dropped over the room, thick enough to touch. Prine's confident smirk began, almost imperceptibly, to waver. Mercy turned a page, took up a pencil, and began to write, her figures neat and unhesitating. "Beef's holding at $38 a head in Denver before your predicted drop, mister. Prine. 14 prime calves at that price is $532. Your note is for $490. If a rider leaves for the rail siding at Kane's Junction tomorrow, those calves can be loaded by Thursday and in Denver by the following week." She pushed the ledger across the table toward him. "You'll have your money in full, with $42 left over for the ranch's trouble in troubling you." Prine stared at the figures as though they had personally insulted him. He had ridden out expecting a defeated rancher and a quick, humiliating bargain, and instead he had been out-reasoned, in his own trade, by a woman he had dismissed as belonging in the kitchen. He gathered his papers with considerably less brisk confidence than he'd arrived with. "The bank will expect payment on schedule," he said, an edge of real anger cracking through his professional smoothness. "You'll have it," Judah said, rising to his full height, and he did not need to raise his voice to make the words land like iron. He held the banker's eyes until Prine looked away first, and then the man was gone, his buggy rattling off down the rutted road with considerably less swagger than it had arrived with. One of the hands in the doorway let out a low whistle, and a ragged little cheer went round the kitchen. Judah did not join it. He looked only at Mercy, who had already turned back to her potatoes as though she had not, moments before, single-handedly stared down a Denver banker and won. That night Judah did not sleep. He lay, turning the day over in his mind, Prine's oily condescension, the tightening dread in his own chest, and then Mercy's quiet certainty cutting through it all like a knife through good bread. He had been drifting, he understood now, for 4 long years, running the ranch on habit and grim endurance, doing the necessary work without any real hope attached to it. He had told himself that was the same as living. It was not. He thought of the ranch without her in it now. The silence of it. The dust settling back over everything she'd scoured clean. And the thought sat in his chest like a stone dropped in a well. He rose before first light. The world outside was hushed under a fine skin of early frost, the first true cold of the season, and he found her already on the back porch with a shawl around her shoulders and a tin cup of coffee steaming between her palms, watching the light come up pale gold over the eastern rise. "Frost came early," she said softly, not turning. "Does most years?" he answered, and came to stand beside her. And for a long moment, neither of them said anything more, only shared the particular quiet of a cold morning breaking into day. "Mercy," he began at last, and his voice, usually so even, carried a rough edge she had not heard in it before. "I am not a man who's ever had much use for speeches. I see what's in front of me, cattle, fences, weather coming, and I miss near everything else. But yesterday you saved this ranch, not just with a ledger and some calves nobody else thought to feed. You've been saving it since the day I found you picking chokecherries by the Larkspur Road. This house was just boards and a roof before you came into it. Now it's a home again, and I don't rightly know how to go back to what it was." He turned to face her fully, and there was nothing slow or hesitant left in his eyes. "The harvest's near done. Your season's work is finished, and I expect I owe you $6 in safe passage wherever you'd care to go next. But I am asking you to stay on, not through one more harvest. For good, if you'll have me. I'm asking you to stay as my wife." The porch held its silence, broken only by the soft tick of frost settling on the rail. Mercy's expression did not change all at once, but something warm rose behind her eyes and burned away whatever cold had been living there since the road to Larkspur Hollow. She took a slow, considering sip of her coffee, weighing his words the way she weighed a recipe that might yet need one more measure of salt. "I had begun to wonder if you'd ever get around to asking," she said at last, and a smile broke over her face like sun through cloud. "You're a good man, Judah Cole, but you are a slow one." "Yes," he admitted, and a grin transformed his weathered face into something younger, unburdened, the first whole smile she had seen cross it since she'd known him. "I expect I am at that." Their courtship, once begun, was as plain and solid as the two of them were no grand declarations, no flowers pressed into books, only shared work and a growing, wordless trust. They rode the fence lines together in the cooling afternoons. She taught him to tell a good crust from an indifferent one. He taught her to read an approaching storm in the particular green-gray cast of the western sky. They were married the first Saturday of October by the circuit judge in Larkspur Hollow, Mercy in a dress of robin's egg blue she had sewn herself from cloth, bought with her own harvest wages, Judah in his one good suit brushed free of dust. The 11 hands stood as witnesses, hats in their scrubbed hands, and afterward there was a wedding supper at the ranch that Mercy had, naturally, cooked herself roast beef and new potatoes and 3 kinds of pie, because a woman does not stop being who she is simply because she has become someone's wife. That night, with the last of the hands gone back to the bunkhouse and the ranch lying quiet under a sky thick with stars, Judah took her hand on the porch where he had asked her to stay. "Welcome home, Mercy," he said. "I believe I've been home a while now," she answered, and leaned into his shoulder, and neither of them said anything else, because there was nothing left that needed saying. 5 years turned over slow and steady as the seasons themselves. The evening light lay long and amber across the Colorado hills the day Judah sat on the porch swing he'd built the summer after their wedding, its familiar creak the only sound in the still air. Mercy came out and settled beside him, handing him his coffee, moving with the same unhurried grace she'd always carried, though the lines of worry that had once lived around her eyes had long since smoothed into something closer to contentment. A small girl with her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes came tearing around the corner of the house, chasing a barn cat that wanted no part of being chased, tripped over the porch step, sat down hard in the dust, considered the matter with great seriousness, and got back up without a single tear. "She's got your stubbornness," Judah said, pride warming his voice. "And your slowness to give up?" Mercy said, eyes bright with amusement. Took her the better part of a minute deciding whether that was worth crying over. Judah laughed, low and easy, and slid his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him the way she had that first frosted morning on this same porch. They watched their daughter chase the cat into the failing light, the ranch behind them prosperous and sound, fences mended, herd fattened, a life built not from any single grand fortune but from the patient accumulation of small, decent things, a shared meal, a mended shirt, a hard truth spoken plainly, a hand found in the dark. "Do you ever think on that, banker?" Judah asked, his voice a low murmur. "Prine." Mercy said the name, like she was tasting something sour. He thought a ledger was only ever about the numbers written in it, never once thought to ask what fed them. "And the 14 calves?" Judah said. "And the 14 calves," she agreed, smiling into her coffee, and he pulled her closer against the cooling evening and thought, as he often did in these quiet hours, of the thin, proud, hollow-eyed young woman he'd found picking sour fruit by a dusty road, and of the woman beside him now, unshakable, clear-eyed, the whole architecture of his life built up around her steadiness. He had been a slow man, by his own admission and everyone else's, but he had gotten there in time, and some nights, watching his daughter chase a cat across land that would never again belong to any banker in Denver, he thought that had made all the difference in the world. Sometimes the thing that saves us isn't luck or rescue, but the quiet skill we've been practicing all along, waiting for its moment. Mercy didn't need a hero, she needed a chance to show what she already knew. So take care of the small things in your own life. The mended shirt, the fed calf, the kindness nobody's watching. One day they'll turn out to be everything. A small note for you. This story was written and imagined by AI purely for entertainment, though we hope its gentle life lesson still found its way to your heart.